Invitation sat in my inbox for 11 days before I opened it. Not because I was busy, though I was, but because I already knew what it would say, and I already knew how it would make me feel. My cousin's engagement party, black tie optional. Venue, TBD. RSVP by the 15th. I remember staring at the subject line while I was standing at my kitchen counter, still in my work clothes, a cup of coffee going cold next to my laptop. My assistant had flagged 3 contracts that needed review before morning. My phone was buzzing with a Slack notification from our West Coast team, and there I was, stuck on an email that probably took my aunt 45 seconds to write. I almost didn't go. My therapist would tell you that's the most honest thing I've said in months. The thing about my family is that they have a story about me, and they've been telling it so long that they actually believe it. The story goes like this. I was the one who didn't go to law school like my father wanted. I was the one who wasted a business degree on some vague startup idea that my mother spent 3 years calling that little project of yours. I was the one who moved to Austin at 26 with savings that made my uncle laugh out loud at Thanksgiving. Actually laugh into his drink. Like I'd said something absurd. I was the one who missed holidays because of work, which they said the way you'd say imaginary friends, with patience. With a kind of pitying tolerance. I went to the party because of my grandmother. She called me the week before, and she didn't ask me to go. She just said she'd been dreaming about my grandfather lately, and that she missed having everyone in the same room. That was it. That was enough. The party was at my aunt and uncle's house in West Lake Hills, the big one with the iron gate and the circular driveway and the kind of landscaping that signals money without ever saying it out loud. They'd hired a catering company, past appetizers, open bar, a string quartet playing softly near the back patio. My cousin Grayson and his fiancée Paige stood near the entrance greeting guests like they were already practicing for the wedding receiving line. I wore a navy wrap dress and my good earrings, nothing flashy. I'd learned a long time ago not to dress in a way that invited comment in either direction. My grandmother found me first. She held both my hands and looked at my face the way she always does, like she's checking something, making sure I'm still in there. You look tired, she said, which from her is actually love. She means I see you. I know something's weighing on you. She patted my cheek and went to find her seat. My mother found me about 4 minutes later. She was wearing the cream blazer she saves for events she considers important. She kissed the air next to my face and said it was good I came, in the tone of someone who wasn't sure it was good. My father was across the room talking to my uncle. He waved at me. Not warmly. The kind of wave that means, I see you, we're fine, don't make this complicated. I got a glass of wine and found a corner near the windows where I could watch the party without being fully inside it. That's a skill I've had since I was a kid. Occupying the edge of a room. Grayson's fiancée Paige came over at some point and hugged me and asked what I'd been up to. Paige is genuinely kind. She actually listened when I answered. We talked for a few minutes about Austin, about how she'd always wanted to visit, about the food scene there. It was the easiest conversation I had all evening. Then my aunt materialized. My aunt has a way of appearing. She doesn't walk into conversations so much as she arrives into them and suddenly rearranging yourself to accommodate her presence. She gave me a look, the full-length kind, head to toe, brief but thorough, and smiled. You look well, she said. Still doing the tech thing. Still doing the tech thing, I said. Good for you. She said it the way you say it to a child who has drawn a picture and taped it to the refrigerator. Genuine enough on the surface, something else entirely underneath. You know, Grayson was just saying he's thinking of getting into real estate investment. The real money is always in hard assets, don't you think? Not all this, she waved a hand vaguely, software stuff. I smiled. I took a sip of wine. I said, which is a word I have perfected over many years of family gatherings. She moved on. I found my way to the dinner table and sat next to my grandmother, which was the right call. She told me a story about a woman at her church who'd learned to knit at 81 and was now making hats for the NICU. We talked about that for a while. It was the most grounded I felt all night. The problem with family dinners is that they move in phases. There's the first phase, which is greeting and drinking and everyone being on their best behavior. There's the second phase, which is food and loosened inhibitions. And then there's the third phase, which is when someone says the thing they've been holding since phase 1. We were deep in the third phase when my aunt leaned across the table toward my mother and said in a voice that was not quite quiet enough, "Is she still renting that apartment in Austin? I keep meaning to ask. The market there has just gotten so out of hand." My mother glanced at me. My mother has the grace to be uncomfortable. I think so, yes. "It's just such a tough city for young people without real equity," my aunt said, nodding with something that wanted to be sympathy. "You know what I mean. Without real assets, real stability." She wasn't looking at me. That's the thing. She was having this conversation about my finances with my mother in front of me while looking somewhere to my left. "She works in software," my mother said, trying in her way. Right. My aunt picked up her wine glass. "I just worry sometimes about people who build their whole lives on things that aren't tangible. You know, things can change so fast in tech. One bad quarter, one layoff wave, and then what? Not like owning property, not like having something real." There was a pause, the kind that has weight. My father cleared his throat. My cousin Grayson was suddenly very interested in his bread plate. My grandmother, to her credit, was looking directly at my aunt with an expression I recognized, the one she uses right before she says something that ends a conversation. But it was Paige who spoke, Paige, who had been quiet through most of dinner, who had been doing the work that new fiancés do, gracious, warm, careful, looked up from her plate and said, "Sorry, I don't think I caught what you do. Like specifically?" She was looking at me. "I'm in software," I said. "I co-founded a company." "What kind of company?" The table had gone a particular kind of still. Not silent. The string quartet was still playing somewhere on the patio. But the people at the table had stopped their side conversations. "We build compliance infrastructure," I said, "for financial institutions, mostly mid-sized banks and credit unions, tools that help them meet federal regulatory requirements without having to build everything from scratch in-house." Paige nodded slowly. "That's okay. How big is the company?" I looked at my wine glass for a second. I do this when I'm deciding how much to say. We closed the Series B last spring, 43 million. The bread plate my cousin had been staring at became less interesting. 43, Paige blinked. "So you actually built that? Like from the start?" "My co-founder and I, yeah. We started in my apartment in Austin, which I'm still renting," I added, "because it's close to the office and I have other priorities for my capital right now." The quiet at the table had a different texture now. My aunt's wine glass was still raised, not quite to her lips. My mother was looking at the centerpiece. My father had the expression of a man doing math. Paige laughed, a short, genuine, slightly disbelieving sound. "I had no idea," she said. "Grayson, did you know?" My cousin looked at me. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't. And here is the thing I want to explain, because I've thought about this a lot. Since that night, I wasn't angry. Not in the way I would have been at 22, which was loud and ready and needed the fight. I was something else, something quieter and older. I looked at my aunt and I watched her recalibrate in real time. The small adjustments, the micro-expressions, the way her posture shifted. And I felt sad more than anything. Not for myself. For the years. For all the dinners where a version of this conversation had happened, and I'd left early and driven home with my jaw tight, and I'd never said anything, and nothing had changed. I thought about what it would mean to say something now, to point to the thing she'd done, to make her account for it at her son's engagement party, in front of her mother-in-law, in front of the fiancé who had just done what my family hadn't done in years. Asked me a direct question and listened to the answer. I thought about it, and then I folded my napkin and I let it go. Not because she deserved that grace, but because I didn't want to give that moment any more of my energy than I already had. My grandmother reached over and put her hand on mine under the table. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. After dinner, people broke into smaller groups. The younger cousins moved out to the patio. My uncle refilled drinks. I found Paige near the dessert table, and she looped her arm through mine, and we stood there for a moment without talking. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "About earlier. The stuff at dinner. It wasn't your fault, I know. But still." She was quiet for a second. "For what it's worth, Grayson talks about you sometimes. He doesn't know you that well, but he always said you were the one who actually did something, like actually built something. He respects that." I looked at her. "He's never said that to me." "Yeah," she sighed. "That's kind of a family problem, isn't it? It wasn't a question." I left around 9:30. I hugged my grandmother for a long time. She held my face in her hands and looked at me again, that same look, and said, "I know. Just that. I know. Just that. I know." My mother walked me to my car. We stood in the driveway for a minute in the November air, and I could hear the party still going inside, the low murmur of it, the music. "I didn't know," she said, "about the funding, about how big it had gotten." "I know you didn't. You didn't tell us." "No," I said, "I didn't." She was quiet. The kind of quiet that wants to be an apology but doesn't quite know the shape of one. "Why not?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. I looked at the iron gate, the perfect landscaping, the front door where my aunt was probably already retelling the evening's events in a version that made sense to her. "Because I wanted to see," I said finally, "if anything had changed. If you'd ask." She looked at me. "We would have asked, Mum." I said it gently. "No one asked. Not once. Not in 7 years. Paige asked. And she's known me for 4 months. She didn't have an answer for that. I don't think she was supposed to." I drove home with the windows cracked despite the cold, the way I do when I need to feel something moving. Austin at night has this quality I've never been able to fully explain to people who haven't lived there. The skyline lit up against a dark sky, the highway almost empty, the sense that the city is breathing. I've been here 6 years. I built something here, not perfectly, not without cost, not without the kind of 2 a.m. moments where I genuinely didn't know if it was going to work. But I built it. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. A text from Paige. "Really glad you came tonight. Let's actually get coffee sometime." I mean it. I smiled at the road, and then another buzz, Grayson this time. Just, "Hey, I'm sorry I never asked. That was cool what you're doing, really." I didn't respond right away. I let it sit there, which felt like the right thing to do, not because I wanted to punish him, but because some things need a minute before you answer them. I got home a little after 10, changed clothes, made tea, sat at the kitchen counter where I always end up. My laptop was still open from that morning. The contracts were still there waiting. My assistant had added a note that the Pacific team had resolved the issue on their own. I sat there for a long time not working. I thought about my grandmother's hand over mine at the table. I thought about Paige asking me a question no one else thought to ask. I thought about my mother's face in the driveway. Not cruel, not even unkind, just caught. Caught between the story she'd been telling about me and the one I'd actually been living. The story my family tells has never been about me, really. It's about what they needed me to be to make their own choices feel right. The daughter who didn't take the safe path is also the proof that the safe path was worth taking. You need that sometimes. A cautionary example. It makes everything else easier to live with. I don't hate them for it. I want to be clear about that. Hating them would require me to keep them at the center of everything, and I'm done doing that. What I have instead is something that took years to build. Quieter than anger, harder to knock over. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the deck we'd been preparing for a follow-on conversation with a potential strategic partner. A regional bank out of Nashville that had been in our pipeline for 2 quarters. Good fundamentals, cautious decision makers, exactly the kind of client we were built for. I read through the first few slides, made a note in the margin, closed it again. Then I texted my grandmother, just thank you for tonight, love you. She responded in under a minute, which at 83 is frankly impressive. A single heart emoji and then, you were the best thing at that party. Don't you forget it. I set my phone down and finished my tea. The contracts would be there in the morning. The Nashville call was Thursday. My co-founder had a question about the new pricing model that we'd been going back and forth on for 2 weeks and still hadn't resolved. There was a lot of work to do. There's always a lot of work to do. That's the part they never ask about. Not because they can't imagine it, but because imagining it would require them to imagine me as someone who does hard things and keeps going, someone who has been building something real in a city they've never visited, without their approval or their interest or their questions. I closed the laptop. I thought about what my grandmother said in the driveway years ago. The last time I'd come home from a bad family dinner and sat in her kitchen crying about wanting to people who weren't watching. She'd handed me a cup of tea and said, "Baby, you cannot spend your whole life waiting for people to turn around. At some point, you just have to keep walking." I kept walking. I'm still walking. And one evening at an engagement party, with my wine glass in my hand and the music drifting in from the patio, a woman who'd known me 4 months turned and asked me a direct question. And the room went quiet, and the story my family had been telling finally ran out of room. I didn't need to say anything else. That was enough. That was quietly and completely enough. There's a version of that evening I used to replay, where I said something sharp at the dinner table. Something precise enough to land, quiet enough to seem effortless. I'd constructed it many times on drives home from other dinners, other holidays, other rooms where I'd let something go and then spent 40 minutes on the highway wishing I hadn't. I didn't say it this time either, and I think that matters. Not because holding your tongue is always right. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes silence is just fear wearing a calmer face. But what I felt sitting there, watching my aunt recalibrate, watching my cousin suddenly find the tablecloth interesting, wasn't fear. It was something I'd had to build over years, the same way I'd built everything else, slowly, without anyone watching, mostly through getting things wrong first. What I've come to understand is that how you carry yourself when no one is validating you is the only honest measure of your character. Not when the room is applauding, not when the funding announcement goes out and people who never ask how you are doing suddenly have a lot to say, but in the years before that, when my aunt was making the face she made and my father was waving across the room and I was driving back to Austin alone. Who was I then? What did I do with that? Did I let it make me bitter, or did I let it make me sharper? I chose sharper, not because I'm particularly noble, but because bitterness is expensive and I had a company to build. That's the part no one in that dining room understood about the work. Not the $43 million. That's just a number, and numbers don't tell you anything about the 2 a.m. moments, the hires that didn't work out, the product pivots that cost us 6 months, the times my co-founder and I sat across from each other and just said, "Okay, what do we do now?" The real thing, the thing underneath the number, is the decision, made over and over again, to keep thinking clearly when everything feels unclear, to keep acting with integrity when no one is checking, to keep going when the people who were supposed to believe in you had already written a different story. My grandmother put her hand over mine at that table and didn't say a word, because she didn't need to. She's watched me long enough to know what the work looks like from the outside. Quiet, unglamorous, often invisible. She also knows that the people who do it anyway, without the applause, without the audience, are the ones who eventually have something real to show. Paige asked me one question, one direct, genuine question. And it changed the whole room. I think about that a lot. How curiosity, real curiosity, the kind that actually listens, is rarer than money and harder to fake than success. She didn't know what she was unlocking when she asked. She just asked because she wanted to know. That's its own kind of intelligence, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. I kept my grandmother's text on my phone for a long time. You were the best thing at that party. Don't you forget it. I read it on hard days, not because I need the reminder that I'm good enough. I've mostly made my peace with that, but because it reminds me what it feels like to be seen by someone who decided a long time ago to keep paying attention. That's what I want to be for the people in my life. Someone who pays attention, someone who asks, someone who doesn't wait until the number is big enough before they think a person is worth knowing. The rest has a way of working itself out.